Welcome to the Center for Diversity Leadership, where we are supporting school leaders together across the nation as they create school cultures that ensure all students are seen, valued, celebrated, and heard. I'm Xavier Reed.
And I am Dr. Sharon H. Porter.
All right. And we have a special episode that we are recording with you today. We have a couple of guests with us today that are going to be a part of our discussion and kind of a panel discussion that we'll have around anti-racist and inclusive leadership. I'm going to introduce our first guest and allow them to give us a brief overview of their background, and then Dr. Porter will introduce the other guests. But I'm introducing Dr. Kevin Armstrong, who is our current NAESP president and has been the executive principal at DuPont Hadley Middle Prep.
Good
Welcome.
evening. Good evening. Yes, Kevin Armstrong. This is year 29 for me in education, all with Metropolitan Nashville Public Schools. Started off my career as a middle school pre-algebra and algebra 1 teacher for nearly 10 years, and then was an assistant principal for 6, and this is year 14 for me as the executive principal at DuPont Hadley. Been a part of NASP for several years, been on the board. This is actually 7, it'll be 7.5 when I roll off, is how many years I've actually been on the board. So started off in the middle level at large minority position, was elected vice president 3 years ago, and this is the year for me to serve as president. So happy to be here, glad to be on, and again, I'm all about the work. So thank you all for having me here today.
Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. And I would like to welcome Ms. Madeline McNeely. She is the founder of Conditioning Leaders, LLC, and she's also an instructor at Harvard's Division of Continuing Education. Welcome, Madeline, and please share more about your background.
Thank you all. Wonderful to be here. Yes, Madeline McNeely. I started my career as a youth worker, and that grew into supporting leaders and organizations to do deep culture change work that's rooted in belonging, equity, inclusion, diversity, justice issues. So I do a lot of executive coaching. One of the groups that I supported last year through Harvard's Division of Continuing Ed is a group of superintendents in the state of Illinois. So supported principals, superintendents, educators of all different levels, teachers, really thinking about what it means to create inclusive culture and leadership. But I have clients from all different backgrounds, nonprofits, the corporate sector, government sector. And Conditioning Leaders, we are a network. And so I bring in colleagues and comrades to support the culture change work we do. I'm Zooming from Boston, Massachusetts.
Awesome. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll jump into our conversation, and as mentioned, it'll be very conversational. We'll jump in and move around and talk about some different topics as related to anti-racist leadership and inclusive leadership as well. And to get us started, we are curious, how do you define inclusive leadership, and why is it important for leaders to embrace this approach, especially in today's diverse work environments?
For me, I guess being an African American, particularly being an African American in the South, there were things that I was subjected to that, I guess became commonplace. Like you don't realize the things that are occurring and have happened until you step outside of the South and kind of get into different areas. So the analogy that I like to use is I'm on the bus stop and I keep getting passed up by the bus. And I just want to get on the bus. So I have been blessed enough to be elevated to not only have had experiences on the bus, but now I'm the bus driver. And so now that I'm the bus driver, I will never forget what it was like to be on the bus stop and to be passed up. And so when it comes to inclusionary practices and things like that, my job is anyone that wants to get on my bus, be it, currently I'm the principal, so I'm going to use that as the focus. But, at our school, anyone that wants on the bus is going to get on the bus because I remember what it was like being passed up. And so in order for you to grow and develop and um and and to rise to where you need to be, you've got to get it. You have to be given a shot. And so that's kind of how I look in terms of hiring practices, in terms of different clubs and different initiatives that come up to possibly be on our campus. Um, we support every child, we support every adult, no matter where they are, because again, that's my focus. Like that's what I always go back to, is remembering being on that proverbial bus stop and being passed up.
Mhm. Mhm. I like that analogy.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Armstrong. I want to build off one piece of what you said around starting with your identity. I'm a white woman. I use the she series. I'm from the North, although I have ancestors from Georgia, but I grew up in Boston. And I grew up in a neighborhood in downtown that was affected by urban renewal, and particularly the demise and the demolition of a whole neighborhood in the West End. I grew up on the backside of Beacon Hill. And across the street from me were rooming houses, unhoused men and women from all walks of life. As a little child, as a young white girl, I sensed dissonance in my body, in my soul. I lived in a townhouse. My family, although there was trouble inside, I never worried about food, clothing, and shelter. That was sort of, a given. Fast forward to middle school and high school, where I witnessed fights between the black kids and the white kids in the after school in our parking lot. I didn't have the education about the disinvestment and the underinvestment in our public school system, predominantly in neighborhoods where Black and brown students were attending. So then you think about what Boston's known for with the busing crisis. Well, is it a busing crisis or is it an underinvestment in public schools? So there I was in a public school navigating race dynamics that I didn't have language and understanding for. So my early upbringing really shaped my consciousness to think about social identities. So, thinking about how I define inclusive leadership. To me, leadership is, I love Youth Build's definition, if people are familiar with Youth Build programs, making sure things go right for yourself, your family, your program, work, organization, whatever your, community environment, your immediate environment is school, and then your extended community. So I think that's a key thing. And then I want to layer on this idea of inclusion. And I often wonder if diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging had voices and each talked to each other. I think inclusion would be asking, are our ideas being listened to, especially when we're talking about underrepresented voices? And if we are not listening to people of underrepresented voices or folks that have historically been oppressed or marginalized, we are missing out on a whole host of ideas for how to make what Dr. Armstrong was speaking about, how to create a culture of belonging. So that's my thinking.
Yeah, yeah. No, I like what both of you, said in terms of that and in terms of, trying to build that inclusive environment. And where my mind went personally is that, schools are are meant to be inclusive, but initially they were not. They were, there was a lot of exclusion. So we always think about, our Black leaders that have come through, and we think about Ruby Bridges, and we think about the fact that she was excluded and she was not welcomed, and it did not feel like that inclusion was truly something that wanted to happen. And I think about like current day, and especially just being a middle school principal, something that I don't think people always realize is exclusionary is sometimes different courses, different advanced courses that students have access to, or there's this perception that they have access to it, but there's still different ways in our systems where that can become exclusionary as well. And so I see myself as someone that's trying to look at the system and take away some of those barriers to make it truly inclusive and make it an inclusive environment for all of our students.
I really like that, Xavier. And that just comes to mind as leaders. How do we create those safe spaces where everyone can feel seen, heard, and valued, especially those of those marginalized communities? Ms. McNeely, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so there's a framework that I use whether I'm facilitating, consulting, training, educating in our classes at Harvard. The idea of touchstones, they're working agreements that support creating safe places where people feel heard. Parker Palmer, the Center for Courage and Renewal, really, coined that term touchstones. But we in our courses and when I teach and even when I coach, I want to create a set of practices that prevent and also are there to intervene when needed, when somebody says something that might be a microaggression or when an unconscious bias, falls out of our mouth and we don't realize it. We have some guardrails, so one of my favorite touchstones is this idea of when the going gets rough, turn to wonder. So when I'm triggered, when my nervous system is out of whack, when I don't have an answer to something and I feel like I should, how can I be less judgmental and more curious about, what's going on? How can I either support curiosity in a group setting or even just within myself? But the practice of touchstones, I think, is an essential tool, essential framework for making sure that people feel seen, heard, valued in spaces where we're learning, where we're dealing with power dynamics, whatever may be the case.
Thank you for that. Dr. Armstrong?
I think it goes back to what Ms. McNeely said a minute ago, is listening. I think for me, sitting in a room with students, with faculty members, with parents, diverse backgrounds, and asking them how they feel. How does our school make them feel? How does our community make them feel? And then just sitting back and being quiet and listening. And the only time that you open your mouth is to ask a question that's just going to give you further insight into what they're saying. Maybe I ask a clarifying question. I think oftentimes, even if they're at the table at all, we have people that are speaking for groups that aren't experts in the area, and they're speaking for people that don't have a voice. And so my thing is, it's very important that you have diverse groups at the table that are speaking from their vantage point. And I ask questions simply just to clarify. So what I'm hearing you say is this, yes, because then, you see people kind of, their guard goes down. They start relaxing because for the first time, often they feel heard. And it doesn't mean that everything that they're asking for is principles. I don't have the capacity to make everything that they want happen, but they can see that we are working together and we can knock off some of these things off the list. But the biggest thing is that they leave the table and they feel heard. And I think that's vital.
I think that's so important. That really brings me, I'm an elementary principal, and I know when we hear inclusiveness, we oftentimes go straight to race. I want to, it made me think of the lens through disabilities. I have a autism program in my building, and inclusive leadership stands out to me because I'm always making sure that my students with autism are included in everything that the general education students are um, a part of. So I think that's extremely important. So thank you all for that responses.
So I know as leaders, we always, there's a good chance that when we're doing the work that we're going to come against, some resistance of trying to create some change or trying to do some of the things that we talked about, whether that's creating more inclusion, being able to bring out more voices for some of our marginalized communities, whatever that may be. I'm curious, what are some of the common challenges or resistance that you've encountered promoting anti-racism or inclusion in the workplace, and how have you overcome it?
I know for me, a mentor of mine told me whenever I was faced with a very important decision in my building, um, to always do what's best for kids.
Mm.
The answer is going to come to you fairly quickly, but the answer is going to involve work, and you're going to have to move and get your hands dirty. And it might not be what your community or your faculty and staff want to hear, but you always do what's best for kids. And so I'm a huge advocate for not only the kids at my school, but the kids in my school district. As you know, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, we had a school shooting here right down the street from where I am right now. So definitely doing what's best for kids and having those courageous conversations, because that's what we're there for. We're there for the kids. So if we have kids that don't feel seen, that don't feel heard, that are just kind of passed over, I take exception to that. And so we have to bring those conversations to the table. And I think the young principal in me probably would not have had the same voice as the veteran principal in me has now. And so I also have to be a voice for some of my younger colleagues who stand on my shoulders, who I'm like, hey, you might not be in a spot to say something, but I feel like I can say it and be respected and it not come across the same way as a young principal. So yeah, so not only speaking up for my community and my school, but sometimes I'm speaking up for other schools and other principals as well.
This is a great question. Thank you. So the challenges and resistance, I think they're similar. And I'm going to talk specifically about being a white socialized human. I think in general, humans, we don't want to feel shame. Shame is a really painful emotion for us to metabolize, integrate. And when we're talking about creating inclusive workplaces, schools, environments, or anti-racist practices, I, as a white woman, was socialized to be polite. I was socialized to not create controversy. And when we're talking about inclusion and anti-racist practices, inherently, if we're doing the work deeply and well, it's going to bring up shame. Because if we're conscious, we're also conscious of our history. We're conscious of generations of genocide and enslavement that, even though on some levels have been, deemed illegal, there's all different ways that oppression still manifests itself. And I think we live in a society that's incredibly ahistorical. So learning to actually be present to history and present day inequities is going to mean we have to face some shame. Because what's happened to us as a species, as humans, that we've enabled this to continue for hundreds and hundreds of years, that our country's founded on even though we're founded on liberatory principles, we also have some dark sides. So the resistance, I think, sometimes shows up in not wanting to feel, not wanting to sit with the reality, and then it shows up as sort of defensiveness. So a lot of my work is with white people and how to overcome it. Again, building on Dr. Armstrong, who I am now, many decades into my career versus in my 20s, I'm much more able to lead with love and dignity in the face of maybe some really disturbing biases that I hear from people that I coach and mentor. And validating the resistance enables that energy to then move towards curiosity or some other perspective. So love and dignity, validation matters, and learning to really sit with cognitive dissonance, sit with the realities of what we think versus sometimes what's actually happening. Easier said than done.
Yeah, I appreciate both of your perspectives, especially being able to reflect and go back to maybe the younger versions that were earlier, that are on their journey, because we obviously know, being leaders, that year one of truly being in that leadership role, whether it's an assistant principal, whether it's the principal, whatever seat that you're sitting in, it's different, and the responses that you get are different as well. And it's also important too, because navigating this work can be challenging sometimes, and we want to keep people in it, along with us, because we've been identified for reasons to be in that. And so I'm wondering, just for those leaders that are on the beginning end of their journey, towards whether it is leadership or anti-racist leadership, inclusive leadership, what are steps that they can take? What would be some advice to begin making a meaningful impact?
Shall I start? You want to? Okay. So I always begin with building your consciousness. I love Dr. Barbara Love's model. It's the 4 A's: awareness, analysis, action, and accountability. So how can I build my awareness? All right, what am I aware of? As again, start with myself, my social identities. Who am I? How has my upbringing shaped me? What are the ways that I've been socialized to, you know, in my leadership? So that's a key thing. I think deepening my analysis around power. I, as a white woman, I am not neutral. I don't walk into a room or a space where there is majority people of color and people immediately trust me. Like that's not, I don't assume that. So having consciousness about my power and understanding the dynamics in relationships. So that's, I think, another key thing. Another beginning step is to find confidential, trusted colleagues whom you can share your biases with, whom you can talk openly about your struggles, about not understanding what it means in practice, perhaps to for hiring or for supervision practices. I don't know what it means to be an inclusive supervisor. Okay, let's figure this out together. So those are some pieces I think are really, really important, is to co-create plans with other people. We don't figure this work out alone.
I think that was a great answer. I really don't have a lot to add, to be honest. First off, I would say, who are you? What do you stand for? Before you jump into, um, I guess, concerns and issues such as these, you have to do a lot of self-reflection to find out who you really are at your core, and what you stand for. Um, I think a big thing is just understanding how to navigate. How do you get to your faculty and staff? How do you get to your community? Sometimes the best thing, might be to have a community meeting. Sometimes you might want to do some internal work before you have it, to get some support behind you before you have a meeting. So, um, but I think the biggest thing that was said just a second ago is just support, because you're going to have to find other people that are kindred spirits that believe what you believe and support what you support. And I think collectively you all can come to the table and figure out, plans to move forward, because this is a tough thing to lift by yourself for sure. In a school community, or just period. It's tough to lift and to carry on yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Armstrong and Ms. McNeely. We want to allow this space for any final thoughts that you have on this most impactful topic. Ms. McNeely and then Dr. Armstrong.
It's okay not to have all the answers. And as a matter of fact, I think that's where the deepest learning can come from. What matters is that you stay committed, and every day you think about, how are my core values being expressed? If I have a core value of inclusion, belonging, whatever they are, mine are love, dignity, transparency, and equity. And I think every day, what am I doing in practice to manifest one of those values? I think that's a key part of building trust and enrolling other people in this work.
Thank you.
For me, I think it's, just being true to yourself and understanding that we see race, we see differences. I think that that's just being human, but understanding that everyone has the right to have a seat at the table, whatever table that is. Everyone has the right to have a voice, no matter what pitch that voice may be. But just understanding that everyone belongs, and making sure that you fight as hard as you can to make sure, for me, being a principal, that your school community feels that, and that they feel supported, that you're a great listener, and that you're an advocate for your school and for your students.
Thank you so much, Dr. Armstrong and Ms. McNeely, for joining us tonight on our podcast. We really appreciate your presence. A lot of the words that you shared, I know is going they're going to inspire our listeners. They're going to inspire our members. But I know that I'll speak for both of us. Me and Dr. Porter are definitely inspired by your words and encouraged by them. So thank you so much once again, our listeners. We appreciate you, and we are happy to have been able to connect with you once again with the Center for Diversity Leadership, and we will connect with you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.